Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of On Oshkosh. I'm your host, Cheryl Hentz. Very happy to have you here on this Thursday after the 4th of July. We're taping this on Thursday, July 6th. Very happy to welcome our two guests tonight. They've never been here before. They are with Caravel Autism here in Oshkosh. Website will be going up periodically throughout the show, caravelautism.com. I almost said .org. But our guests are to my right. We have Abby Amacher. She is, I'm going to give these initials and then we're going to find out what they all are.
Okay.
She's an MA and a BCBA and an LBA. Most importantly, she's the clinical director and the lead BCBA at Caravel here in Oshkosh. And then seated to her right, we have Courtney Schroeder. Courtney's initials or credentials are BCBA and LBA. And you are a behavior analyst with Caravel.
Yes.
Welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it a great deal. One of the things that, before we get into the credentials, how long has Caravel been in Oshkosh?
In Oshkosh for in-home therapy since 2011.
Oh, really?
But our
Okay.
clinic opened in December of 2021.
Okay, and that's what I'm thinking of because I thought, geez, I've never seen that building here before, and they're down on South Main. What's the address on South Main?
1306 South
Yeah.
Main. So we're just across the street from the Oshkosh Arena.
Yes, yeah, and kind of down there where if you go down the road where the old Pioneer Inn used to be, you have to turn right around and come back and go past your place again because you can't, it's all blocked off. So, yeah, okay, so since 2021 down there. Okay, very good. And let's talk about these credentials. What does MA stand for?
So I have my Master of Arts in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Okay.
I got that from Ball State in Muncie, Indiana.
Okay.
And then BCBA is a national certification.
Okay.
So it's board certified behavior analyst.
Okay.
And then the state of Wisconsin requires behavior analysts to be licensed. So then LBA is licensed behavior analyst.
Okay.
Really creative, right? And that is a state Wisconsin requirement. So some states just require a national certification to be licensed to practice. In the state of Wisconsin, we also need to meet our state's own requirements. So we both hold 2 licenses throughout the nation.
And just out of curiosity, because I don't know, how often do those have to be renewed?
Every 2 years.
Every 2
and
years.
then there is 32 continuing education hours that we have to take every 2 years.
Okay. Well, and that helps you maintain your certification then as well. Okay, excellent. Well, I want to start by finding out exactly what autism is. We hear a lot about it. I don't want to call it a buzzword, but we hear it a lot on the radio, on TV, in news articles, both in print and on TV and so forth. And some people may have a really good understanding of what autism is, especially if they have a family member or a loved one or close friend who's got autism. But like for myself, I have to admit, I don't really know exactly what it is. I have a general idea, but if I had to write out an essay on a test, I would probably fail because I don't really know. So why don't we start there? What is autism?
Sure. And I think you have to look at autism today compared to autism in the 1970s and the 1980s and how that's shifted over time. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, so it affects our nervous system as well as all other systems in our body. But it is a collection of symptoms that make up a diagnosis. There's not a blood test. There isn't something that says genetically, yes, you have autism, no, you don't. And so you're really looking at 3 big things. We have deficits in our language and communication, deficits in social skills, and deficits in what is called restrictive and repetitive behavior. So that may be things along the lines of self-stimulatory behavior. Everybody stims. If you have the person that's the leg shaker in a movie, it's a stim. I'm a ring flipper.
Pen clicker.
Yeah, pen clickers. Everybody stims. But the level of which we do that may actually interfere with our ability to function in a typically developing setting. So beyond that, I mean, that's what autism is. It's those 3 things. And there's different levels, which we'll get into a little bit later, I think.
Yeah.
But
Do you have to have all 3?
yes.
Okay.
So there needs to be deficits in all three categories. There could be, one in language and communication, one in social, and two in restrictive and repetitive behaviors. But we're really just looking at that collection of symptoms that makes up a diagnosis. And beyond that, autism looks different for every single person. So I have said my entire career, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And I think Courtney can attest to, in the years that we've worked with people on the autism spectrum, everybody looks different.
Looks different, sounds different, so it's going to look different for every kid, every adult. So.
Okay. See, now you got me all nervous. Now I'm going to be mindful of what I'm doing with my pen.
Well, usually we get, are you analyzing me right now? No, I'm not. So.
Well, I'm not a pen clicker, but I have caught myself over the years, kind of doing one of these things, you just kind of twirl it around in your hands. And in fact, someone I worked with many, many years ago said, "Stop that. Why are you doing that?" I said, "I'm doing what,
And you don't even realize it. It's just built in. And oftentimes we do those to help self-regulate. And that may mean this task is boring, so I'm going to do this thing to keep my brain engaged. Or usually in heightened anxiety, stressful events, we may see more self-stimulatory behaviors as a way for us to try and calm ourselves down. So when you think about autism and the ability to handle sensory input, so loud noises, smells, tastes, things like that, we may see an increase in self-stimulatory behavior because the more we do that, the easier it is to handle the other things that are happening around us.
Yeah, and for me, I don't know if it was anxiety or anything like that, because what I was doing was, it was interesting. I was enjoying it.
Sure.
It was my job. I liked it. I was good at it. I didn't have any of those issues. But, I don't know. Maybe it's just I have to be doing something with my fingers or something.
Also that.
Because I can remember a certain kind of bookmark that I had. And I would, like if this was the bookmark, as I was reading, I would sometimes be tapping it on the page. I liked the sound that it made. So maybe it was an oratory that's hearing.
One of
right?
those sensory pieces. And the other thing is we stim because it feels good. So we don't have to be stressed or anxious, but we just enjoy it. Yeah. And I think one of the good things as autism has, you said buzzword, it's become more mainstream. Oh, they have autism. What does that mean? There's different support levels, but the great thing is sensory supports. So things like fidgets, which are something that a lot of our kids use. And like, I'm a hand talker. If I have a fidget on a table, if I'm at a conference and they put fidgets out, I'm going to play with it while I'm listening to a speaker. Those things have become more mainstream. So they're now easier to access for the kids that need them, the adults that need them. And just because somebody doesn't have autism doesn't mean those sensory tools would benefit them. So I think it's really great. Now I can walk into Target and see that those fidgets are available, where even 2 or 3 years ago, that was something that you had to special order.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about fidgets, are you talking, Abby, about I saw this on a car salesman's desk one time. It had kind of 4 prongs, and it could spin on his desk, or he could hold it and spin it that way. And I thought it was just the coolest thing, so I bought 3 or 4 of them. I've never used them. In fact, 2 of them haven't even come out of the boxes. I took the first one out just to, see what it looked like. Okay, would I enjoy using this? And I got bored with it very quickly.
Sure, and that could be, maybe it's not the right, like the cubes are handy. They have multiple different functions. I just saw, they make a ring now. So there's a ring and a ring that sits on top of it. So you could actually
I have some of those.
So they're coming up with more things that those of us who aren't autistic, that we can play around with.
Absolutely, we can all benefit from those things.
Well, I would probably just distract people, but but it's nice to know that those things are out there. So how do you go about diagnosing any kind of autism? And you mentioned spectrum, you mentioned the autism spectrum, and I want to talk about what that is too, because I hear that expression all the time, and yet I don't really know what it is. So, but let's talk about how autism is diagnosed, and then maybe we can talk about the autism spectrum.
Sure. I do want to give some context. So in 2015, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual was changed, and that's used for all psychiatric and psychological disorders. Everything has a code, right? So autism is F84. And within that, we changed how things are diagnosed. So prior to 2015, you would have heard Asperger's, autism, and then something called pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, which was shortened to PDD because it's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, yeah.
And what that looked at was Asperger's is where you would say, okay, this person has deficits in social skills and they have deficits in repetitive and restrictive behaviors, but no language deficits. Autism, or classical autism, you have deficits in all three areas. And then PDD, NOS, you really didn't fit into the other two boxes. And what happened with diagnostic processes in that is some kids that were very clearly on the autism spectrum were not diagnosed. Some people were getting diagnosed that shouldn't have been. And so as a nation and the American Psychological Association decided we should probably clean this up. And so what they created is everything is under the umbrella term of autism. And then within that, there are certain tests that are conducted. These are all evidence-based. They've been tested for validity and reliability, meaning that the result is always the same. And there's a few different tests that people can pick from. So there's a childhood autism rating scale, the ADOS, which is Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. We're really big on acronyms, but when a child is being referred, or an adult referred for a diagnostic, we're going to do an interview first just to get a verbal idea of what may be going on with that child. And then we're going to look at conducting standardized tests. So that's where the CARS or the ADOS and some IQ tests come into play, because we also want to see, is there an accompanying intellectual disability?
Okay.
That autism does not automatically equate a lower IQ or a developmental disability.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
There's differences within that. So we either want to rule in or rule out. Sometimes there's a language impairment, sometimes there's not. So with the diagnostic process, we're also looking at all of those things. And then we enter the data. So a parent has answered several questions on a standardized test. We submit it. It gives us a score. What we're looking at is how much does that score veer from your average person. I don't like the word normal. Nobody's normal. We all have idiosyncrasies and different things that we do, but there is an average IQ, which is between 85 and 115.
Okay.
So we can look at IQ tests and say, okay, where does that fall within the average? There is an average amount of skills that somebody can complete, say, by the age of 3 or by the age of 6. We know that over years and years and years of research and tracking child development, that there are generally, 90% of people are going to fall in these parameters. And so we take all of that information at the end of the diagnostic process, compile it all together, and then determine, does this child meet the diagnostic criteria for autism? And if we say yes to that, then we look at, okay, what level of autism do they have? So instead of Asperger's, autism, and PDD, NOS, it's now level 1, 2, or 3.
Okay.
Level 1 requires support. Level 2 requires substantial support. And level 3 is intensive levels of support. Somebody may need intensive level 3 support for language, but have level 1 restricted and repetitive behaviors. Level 2 socialization. That piece allows us to have a much clearer picture of what the child or adult may need support with, and tailors treatment recommendations and things along those lines. So the hardest thing is saying it depends. That there is still some gray areas in regards to diagnostics.
Okay. And so, as I mentioned, I do often hear people say they're on the autism spectrum. And when I hear that, when I think of a spectrum, I think of something going from 0 to 10, or, A to Z, or A to L, or A to M, something like that. And I think, okay, there's somewhere, autism is this big, long thing, and they fall somewhere along there. But I don't think I'm really right on that. Or am I?
That is a really common way of thinking of it. we hear there's low functioning and there's high functioning. So if I'm thinking of it as a line, oh, I'm low functioning, so I'm over here, and high functioning means I need less support. But we have found that that's not really the case. People have, not really.
And that's
I think
okay.
that's the mainstream
It's not
way
the first time
of going
I've been
about
wrong.
it. And I like to think of it as a pie chart. So if this pie is social skills, and this pie is communication, and this pie is, motor imitation. So can I imitate what somebody else is doing? I may need substantial support in one chunk, my pie slice, but these two, I need less support.
Okay.
So you want to think about the spectrum as more of these chunks of the more it's pulled out of the pie, the more support I need, the less the slice, versus on a number line.
Okay.
And so with that, somebody may need significant support in the workplace, but they don't need support with socialization or language skills. And so it's really then looking at, for a specific person, what do they need support with? And then can we get rid of some of those functioning labels? When I say low functioning, what does that tell you about a person? Nothing. We're making assumptions based on a term where we see kids who may be considered low functioning, maybe they have limited language, but their visual performance skills, they can do 500-piece puzzles. Like, we all have splinter skills or things that we are very interested in, so we're much better at. And so we don't want to just lump everybody into one category and say, that's what autism looks like. Because, child A may do really well in a loud environment. They love to go to, say, brewer games. But child B may think that that is the worst thing in the world, and they would prefer to play by themselves. And for child A, that's terrible. So I think there's some misconceptions, too, that, all kids on the autism spectrum don't socialize. Not the case. There's levels. So we have kids at the clinic that come up to you and give you a hug and say hello. And we have kids that may just not be interested in communicating with somebody, and that's okay too.
Or maybe they don't like physical interaction. And they're fine in all other areas, but they just don't like that.
And that's okay.
So, I think of like two movies, Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, who looks nothing like his former self in the new Mission Impossible movie. But so I suspect there might have been a little work done there, or maybe some touch-ups, some wonderful things with makeup. Who knows?
Fix it in post.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. So that movie, and then A Beautiful Mind is another one that kind of springs to mind, no pun intended, when I think about autism. But in both those cases, were those characters autistic? Because I can't remember.
In Rain Man, yes. Okay. In A Beautiful Mind, I'm not sure if John Nash was or not. There's some, I think, rumors that Albert Einstein was on the autism spectrum. I don't know if that's ever actually been confirmed or not. But that's where you're looking at some really interesting splinter skills. So I remember in Rain Man, the toothpicks get dropped, and he counts all of them immediately. That is moving more towards what we would consider savant, where there is this really wild skill set that may have an IQ in the 150s, 160s, but that social piece may be much more challenging. Not as common. One of the clinics in Fond du Lac, the Treffert Center, Dr. Treffert, who has unfortunately passed away a few years ago, that was his specialty. So he actually worked on the set of Rain Man.
Oh, wow.
And did a lot, created a school around pulling out those savant type skills and seeing what they can do to turn that into, career, language development, things like that. So not something that, I don't think it's as common as media makes it out to be. And John, I'm going to have to look into A Beautiful Mind. Now I'm curious about that and to see.
Yeah. So I guess one thing then that we've learned is that people who have autism, whatever kind it may be, and to whatever degree of severity or non-severity it is, they can be really super strong in one area and almost savant-like.
Sure.
Or brilliant-like. And you mentioned Albert Einstein. That blows me away. I don't know why, but you wouldn't think of someone like him as possibly having autism.
Well, and I think that's where that misconception too, that autism automatically equals intellectual disabilities, where he is doing really high-level math. I'm not going to do that math. But so
never
this
could.
idea of autism is not directly linked to intelligence level. But really thinking about if he struggled in his life with socialization, that could have been autism. But really just thinking about autism is so varied, and there's not a standard, there's not a stereotype. And I grew up with Rain Man. That was my interpretation of autism, or in school, that we were all separated. If your peers needed extra support, they were not with you. Where in schools today, they're taking a much more mainstream approach and making sure that everybody has access to the same learning materials, but they might need support in a different way.
Okay.
So it's moved in a good direction, I think.
So when kids are in school, do you think that they do better in public school or in private school, or public school with, some additional support, maybe from a tutor of some kind, or does it not really matter as long as they have the best kinds of people working with them?
I think the second part, the people matter. Legally, a public school has to provide individual supports.
Okay.
A private school does not. So they may willingly enroll a child with a disability, but if they feel that they can't meet the needs of that child, that they would refer out to a public school setting. We worked in schools before, so helping students transition into a typical education classroom. But then within the school setting, you're looking at things like speech therapy, occupational therapy, paraprofessional support within the classroom. And the great thing about public schools is that is provided at no cost to the family. So it's written into an individual education plan, and then they're able to access those needed supports and services.
Yeah. It's just, man, the schools, their budgets are so tight, and there's more and more people being diagnosed with different problems and issues, emotional, physiological, physical, whatever it might be. And these paraprofessionals, I have to believe, are kind of getting taxed to the max also.
There's burnout. I think burnout is high in any caring field, right? Nursing homes, daycares, people with disabilities, where we take on a lot of the stress and things we want to help. That's why we go into this field. And I think it speaks more to, as society, do we need to change how we do things to help accommodate more people, or should we continue to expect people to change to fit into what society says they need to do? One thing that the Oshkosh School District actually started years ago was flexible seating. So if kids, like we're the leg shaker, right? And that is disruptive to your friends in your class because you're constantly moving your seat. They can have flexible seating options. There are desks where a swing bar goes underneath, and I can sit and happily swing my legs back and forth, and it's not going to disrupt the learning for my peers next to me.
And I have some experience working within schools as well, and I've seen that some of those resources are even offered to individuals that might not have that diagnosis, or might have just struggle to concentrate or things like that. So it's kind of like we've been mentioning, that theme of everything becoming more mainstream.
Sure.
I think that is another really common thing too. But exercise balls, they have all different sorts and kinds of chairs to help kids concentrate, all throughout the school.
Okay. This question just kind of came to mind, so I'll ask it, and it's probably out of order of what we're talking about here. But can someone become autistic at any point in their life, or is it something that you are born with and that's it?
I think that is a gray area question. What we know of autism, it is most likely genetic. It started in utero. You are born with that. As we age, symptoms can become more prevalent. So at, say, 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, we may have seen very limited symptoms. And as we age and expectations increase around language, socialization, we may see more delays. A lot of adults that have been diagnosed, it's a light bulb moment where they say, oh, well, this makes sense as to why I struggled in school, or why I couldn't make friends, or why this was a challenge for me. And I think that that's given some hope to other people of, okay, it's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. But then it also helps us identify symptoms at an earlier age and just start treatment and early intervention to hope that a child will need less supports as they go through their life cycle.
Well, sure, because then as we age, we've got all these other things factoring in, early onset of Alzheimer's or some kind of, mental disease or defect that people can get. There's just so many things.
And thinking about comorbidities, so diagnoses occurring simultaneously. For example, Down syndrome and Alzheimer's is linked very closely together. And that, thinking about autism, we have there's a lot of kids and adults that may have autism and also have ADD or ADHD, or autism and anxiety. And so then you're looking at how do those two things make the brain work a little bit differently, and how can we set up environments for everyone to be successful.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the different levels of autism. Sure. There's different levels, it seems, there's different levels, there's different types. So let's start with the different types, the different levels of autism.
Sure, and I briefly touched on that before, so to just expand on that. Level 1 is going to be diagnosed where there are minimal supports required. And in that, the diagnosis of level 1, non-intensive treatment would be needed. So they might just need some additional aids and supports, a little boost, maybe some talk therapy, not looking at intensive levels of treatment needed. An individual education plan is usually sufficient within the public school system. And then when we step into level 2, we need more substantial support. And that means direct teaching, breaking skills down into smaller components, and thinking about what areas of this child's life may they need an adult or another person to help them at all times. And then level 3, that is our area requiring significant support. And that is where we see the most severe deficits. So in language, a child may be completely non-vocal, so that maybe they babble or they make some sounds, but they're not engaging in speech as we know it. Our level 3 with socialization and play, we see kids that completely isolate themselves from others. They don't have any functional play skills. And play skills, we all like what we like, but the idea that I sit in a corner and spin a tire on a car for 8 hours, it's not harmful, but they're also not getting to experience things in life. And so we look at teaching those. And then we also see with restricted and repetitive behaviors, level 3 would be things like really severe aggression, property destruction, apparently I can only think of those two things.
Self-injurious behaviors, which we call SIBs, so that's harming themselves in some way, shape, or form.
And typically that is tied directly to a severe deficit in communication. So if I'm frustrated and I don't have an effective way to communicate with you, maybe I'll hit you instead, because the
better not.
Quickest but what's the quickest way to get someone's attention? Is to do something that you really shouldn't do. I need help with something, so I want this cookie. I have no way to communicate to you that I want this cookie, so I'm going to look at it and hit you and see what happens. Courtney has a ton of experience with assisted and augmented communication devices.
Yes,
Probably
AAC
said that
devices,
wrong.
yes.
What is it called?
They're augmentative alternative communication devices. So those are those iPads, those tablets that have different apps, different softwares, which you can get on the App Store. Some are free, some are a little more advanced, so they require a little bit more funding. But that basically provides a voice to some of our learners that either A, don't have a voice, don't have that expressive vocal verbal skills, or it even helps some that do have that expressive language skill developing, continue to talk, continue to learn how to communicate their needs and wants to decrease things like the things we were just talking about, the destructive behaviors, the harming themselves or others.
Oh yeah, harming themselves. That was the other one I wanted to write down.
And self-interest behavior is tricky because the longer it goes on, so if I start hitting myself at age 3 and I'm still hitting myself by age 10, I'm rewiring how my brain processes pain. And then that becomes a standard self-regulation tool. And unfortunately, that is a behavior that we need to work to reduce because it can cause permanent brain damage, injuries around the ear, similar to what boxers may experience, deafness. Say somebody is a skin picker, you can get MRSA and other infections. And so really thinking about those level 3, these are the kids and adults that really need what we call comprehensive treatment, that they need help in every area of their lives.
So one thing we hear about, I think more than we would like to, with teenagers today, is kids who self-harm. You know, they're cutting themselves and that kind of thing. Just because someone is cutting themselves does not mean that they have autism.
Correct.
They have to have these other things that we talked about. They more than likely are just suffering from some type of depression. And so I would hope that people wouldn't just jump to these massive conclusions that, oh, they're a cutter, they're hurting themselves, they're autistic.
Right. And they could be.
Could be.
We don't know.
But it's not necessarily
But it wouldn't be
so.
an automatic.
Yeah, okay. Abby, you had mentioned something called talk therapy. What is talk therapy?
That's more looking at traditional counseling. So psychotherapy, there's a couple different cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. That is more in a line what we do at work in regards to environment modifications and things like that. But really sometimes kids just need an hour a week to talk to someone. They work on solving those problems, and then they're able to take that information out into the world. And the kids that we see and treat, that would not be sufficient.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we've got the 3 levels of autism. What are the 5 different types of autism? And I think you kind of touched on those a little bit too. But
and that's where, so it's autism, Asperger's, PDD, NOS. I mean, those are the big 3. And then within that, we see different areas of need and levels of help.
Okay. And then the 4 types of autism spectrum disorder. This gets really complicated.
It does. I mean, and they're really all the same. So again, it's under that umbrella now. So things fit within that.
Sure. Okay. All right. And the 3 main types of autism, Asperger's, and the one with all those initials.
All those initials. And now it is just autism level 1, 2, or 3.
Okay. The mildest form of autism would be what?
That is a tricky question.
That is a tricky question. That's why I'm looking at you. I mean, mildest form, a child with some social idiosyncrasies. Maybe they seem a little different. I would look at no self-injurious behaviors, no aggression. So very limited in regards to restrictive and repetitive behaviors. Language skills are present. They just need a little bit of support. Okay. And the thing that's tricky is, as a child, we would identify that as a concern, and when somebody's an adult, that's just being an adult.
Yeah. Well, and it also becomes a little tricky because if a child is in school and has some of these tendencies, they would, I don't want to say always, but they would quite likely get bullied.
Most likely. And then as we turn into adults, if I have a special interest in a certain video game, I can go find 500 other adults online that also have that special interest.
Right.
Nobody's going to bully that person. It no longer is odd or you don't stand out. And so I think that's tricky too, that why is it a problem as a child, but then when we're an adult, you can make your own choices and, oh, no, now it's no longer a problem.
Well, when I was in school, we had a kid, and he was very smart. He was super smart. His parents were both college or university professors. He was really quite brilliant. And yet, he was advanced, you know, when we were all in like what was then called middle school, now called, well, no, it's now called middle school. It was then called junior high school. See, I'm dating myself here a lot. But so in junior high, he was taking not just high school, but also some college courses. But he didn't want to socialize with us. Now, is that because he's got autism to some degree, or he's got something else going on, or is it just maybe he looks down on us because we're not as intelligent as he is, you know? Or maybe he just doesn't have time.
Sure.
To
He's
hang
not
out with
interested in
us.
those things.
He doesn't have the same interests that the rest of us do because he's got all these other things. He's not only got to do his junior high school stuff, but he's got to do all this other stuff too. And maybe he just doesn't have time or the interest. But some kids really picked on him a lot and bullied him. And, you know, but we all survived the bullying, but we didn't have to live with it 24/7 like today's kids on social media. And so this whole thing of what you guys do is really super admirable, but boy, it can get tricky.
It can get tricky. There's a lot of moving parts and figuring out treatment goals with families, and we coordinate care with schools, and there's a lot of people. And their child, what do they want?
Yeah.
And making sure that we take that voice into consideration too. Because our parents may want different things than us. So.
Right. So we don't really know for certain what the mildest form of autism would be. Okay.
We can say to standardized tests, you know, that this number spit out this score, and that could be the mildest form. But another child may have something, the score similar, and then not meet the diagnostic criteria. So that's really tricky. I think it's a little bit easier to identify the most severe forms, which there's an HBO special like 6 or 7 years ago that is 3 parents who have sons who engage in a lot of those level 3 type really severe behaviors. And it is really heartbreaking to watch the struggles that they're trying to find for treatment and support at 10 and 12 and 16, because you can really start hurting other people.
Sure.
And that's severe autism. That is where there might be language, but we have rooms getting destroyed and an inability to communicate even when we're calm. So I think that is definitely a little bit easier to identify. And sometimes you're going to have autistic advocates or adults on the autism spectrum. Autistic versus on the spectrum is very a person-specific preference, so I switch between the two.
Okay.
But an autistic adult may say that severe autism presentation isn't autism, and that it's just the moderate to mild side. But in reality, it's all autism. It's just different levels of support and needs.
Yeah. So many things today we hear more about. We hear more about kids being diagnosed with autism. We hear more about kids being diagnosed and given medication for ADD and things like that. Why is it we didn't hear about so much of this back then? Is it that we didn't know as much back then and we didn't therefore diagnose it? Is it that we weren't paying attention the way we are today? It could be any number of things, I suppose, but why do you think that is?
I do think there's a couple of reasons. We got better at diagnosing and identifying specifically what autism is and what that looks like. Also, we don't do a lot of residential treatment anymore. So for a long time, even well through the 90s, if you had a kid with a disability, they may not have lived at home with you. They may have been in a group home or a specialized school for the school year and then home in the summer, where that was really common. Oh, they have an intellectual disability, or it's this or it's that. It's not autism, but it probably was. And I think as diagnostics have gotten better, that's where we see that increase. So when I started in this field in 2008, the diagnostics was 1 in 204 children. As of today, it's 1 in 39.
Wow.
But our diagnostic tools have also gotten dramatically better. So somebody that 10 years ago may have been diagnosed with a global developmental delay may actually have had autism. And so we've just honed in on our ability to do that.
Now, what's global developmental delay?
Exactly what it sounds like. So it's a delay in every area of their lives.
Oh, wow.
And that has its own code tied in that diagnostic.
And its own acronym?
And it's probably its own acronym.
I can't even believe it, but we've got 18 minutes left in this show, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface. How can we best discuss support needs for someone? And I guess a lot of that depends on what kind of support they need.
Yep.
Right?
And it's really looking at, what does the person want? So if I have somebody that can tell me, I don't care if I have friends or not, that's not a priority for them. No, let's not focus on that. But really thinking about how in the community can we make areas more inclusive. So I was at Miller Park. We're going to call it Miller Park because I refuse to change the Brewers Stadium name.
Oh, okay.
But they now have at their guest relations sensory bags. They have headphones. There's some fidgets and things like that. So you can walk up there and say, "Hey, I need this." Disney World has really great supports in place. So what we're looking at is just making sure that those things are available so that people in the community can more readily access them. And then knowing, does somebody need a job coach for them to work better? Do they need a different type of desk, a different environment? Do they need noise canceling headphones? Or sometimes that silence is really awful. Do they need to have music playing in the background? Mm-hmm. So it's really looking at each specific person and what supports they need in each area of their life instead of just assuming that somebody can't do something for themselves.
Abby, how are these things promoted, like the stuff at, as you call it, Miller Park? How do people know that these things exist? And what are they called, sensory bags?
Yep, sensory bags. So at Miller Park, I think Oshkosh Arena does something. There's like a sensory area at the Herd games. Okay. Typically, it's people like us that are contacting these organizations or event places and saying, hey, we think this would be really great. Or community organizing with families. Mm-hmm. So Monkey Joe's up in Appleton, that was organized by parents to have like a sensory friendly day. Zeroni's Pizza, when they were open for in-person, I have to check and see if they're still doing it, did a sensory friendly Tuesday. So the lights were dim, the music was not on. They were just trying to decrease some of the noises and things. Marcus Cedars, pre-COVID, used to do a sensory Saturday every month. So the sound is down.
I've never heard this stuff advertised at all.
Parents, and that's the other thing. A lot of people don't know that it exists. Parents and people that work with people on the spectrum are probably the two organizations or people that are trying to get those things approved. There is also a program called Children's Long-Term Support in the state of Wisconsin. It's in all 72 counties. And if your child meets the functional criteria for this support, they can get additional services paid for from the county at no cost to them. It is a sliding scale, so if someone's income is really high, there may be a small fee. Things like equine therapy, safety. So say your child elopes from the house.
Yep, I've had fences, door locks, or door alarms, I should say, for kiddos that are runners. There's a lot of resources that the county specifically has. And again, that's another really great resource, especially for those families, because they sometimes have suggestions about, Monkey Joe's and, the Brewers. Like, those are things that they have access to or know about or have learned about that they share and promote to these families.
It's hard because it's not readily available. Yeah. So most families that come through our doors, we are the first ones telling them that children's long-term support exists. Mm-hmm. It's not, you can Google it, but that's not going to give you a ton of information either. Sure. And so we want to try and match families to services that are the most meaningful for them.
Sure. You know, and I would think that businesses who are like having these sensory bags or, you know, having lights dimmed and lower music or a lower reduction noise or whatever, I would think that those businesses would want to promote that more so that those of us in the community know that, hey, this exists. We may not necessarily have a need for it, but I would like to know it exists.
You might know someone that has a need for it.
Exactly. I might know someone, or it might be something I want to help promote on this show. You know, while I can't promote specific for-profit businesses, because this is a non-commercial entity, so I always have to be careful about what I'm having on. But while I may not be able to promote their commercial entity, I certainly can promote what they do in a non-commercial sense. And so I would like to know about those things. But also it's just good to know that businesses and community leaders are making efforts.
They're listening.
You know, they are. And they're making efforts to make things better, even if it's in a small sort of way. Is there like a Facebook group out there in this community or in, you know, Northeast Wisconsin or something where parents of autistic children can share some of these things that says, hey, you know, Zeroni's may offer this or somebody else offers this?
Oh, there's so many out there.
Are there really?
Yeah,
Okay.
even for like aunts and uncles, grandparents, foster parents, you name it.
Okay.
It's out there, maybe not necessarily Facebook, but there are so many different sources and
Support
resources
groups and resources and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Are those advertised on your website at all? Are they listed on your website?
Not for us,
Okay.
but we do often just refer parents to say, hey, check this out.
Okay.
We also want to be careful with, I don't want to endorse necessarily a Facebook page, but I can tell parents that it exists.
Sure. Okay. Very quickly, what is the neurodiversity movement?
Sure, and that's looking at all of our brains are different. So you have most likely seen the autism puzzle piece symbol in the past.
Yes.
And the neurodiversity movement is an infinity symbol. It's a rainbow. I don't know how to make an infinity symbol with my fingers. But with that, we're really just looking at everybody's brains are different, and that's fine. Nobody needs to fit in a box. And at Caravel this month, we are celebrating neurodiversity and just thinking about who are those people that maybe their brains function a little bit differently than others, and that's totally okay.
Okay.
And thinking about talking with your hands, that's a little bit neurodiverse. We all have something that makes us who we are. And our goal is no longer to cure autism. And years ago when research was first done, we wanted to make kids indistinguishable from their peers. We know now that that's not what's appropriate, and everybody can be themselves, but we can also help with teaching those things. So it's how can we support a person and also make sure that we're respecting their own neurodivergent brains.
Okay. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to some of these other questions. What do you work the most with? Is it children or is it, I would assume it's children. Do you also work with adults?
So we specifically do not at Caravel, but applied behavior analysis, which is the therapy that we do, can be used across the lifespan. So it works with 2-year-olds and it works with 90-year-olds.
Okay.
As Caravel, in our clinic, we serve kids between 18 months and 12 years of age. And then when staffing and capacity allows it, we do offer in-home therapy, which would serve up to age 18.
Okay.
Staffing, much like the rest of the nation, is always a bit of a challenge.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. How do you, and I know one of the questions that you had provided to me is, you know, what's the diagnostic process look like? And I certainly want to talk about that, but when I think of 18 months, that seems so young. I mean, most kids aren't, unless they're a genius, they're not talking at 18 months. And so how can you even diagnose a child that young?
So the big things that we see, so Courtney and I work for Caravel Autism. So we provide treatment to kids that already have a diagnosis. And then our Caravel Counseling and Diagnostic team, they're the people doing the evaluations.
And they're under the same roof?
Under the Green Bay.
Okay.
So same company, just different city.
All right.
And with that, at 18 months, there's a couple of big things that we see. So there's no babbling. So they might not be saying words, but any 18-month-old might not be saying words, but there's been no attempt at babbling. And one of the biggest things that we see is a lack of joint attention. So if I'm looking at you and I turn, are you able to track my eyesight? Just like, okay, Abby's looking at water, she wants water. Typically, if that skill is going to be delayed, if it's not present by the age of 3 months, there's some research to indicate that that child will most likely be diagnosed with autism later in life.
Okay.
So there are a lot of things that kids under 18 months old are capable of doing that we may not realize it's a delay, especially if it's your first child. You have nothing to compare that to.
Sure.
I recently had a baby in January, and
Congratulations.
so thank you. But it's been very interesting to see his developmental track because I've never experienced this before. So noticing, okay, there is some cooing back and forth or whatever that might look like. But again, it's a collection of symptoms. So we may have a child at 18 months that is social, but maybe they're engaging in some of those severe problem behaviors. We do see self-injurious behavior as young as 18 months old.
Wow.
Goes with a lack of communication and things along those lines. So we are looking at different things at 18 months than we are at 3, than we are at 7, but it still falls under that umbrella.
Okay. So you guys don't necessarily do diagnostics here in Oshkosh?
Not in town. So
Okay.
everybody, they get referred out to one of our bigger locations that has a psychologist on staff.
Okay.
One of the interviews is via telehealth. There's an in-person appointment and then a follow-up via telehealth to go through all of the diagnostic tests.
And then if they were diagnosed with autism, then they would, and they live in Oshkosh, they would work with you guys here in Oshkosh.
So then we do something called a meet and greet. So that family is linked up with me. They can either meet with me over telehealth or come to the clinic and see it. And we talk about what we do and the things that we can work on in treatment, which are all the things directly related to somebody's autism diagnosis of language, socialization, restrictive, repetitive behaviors.
How long does treatment typically have to go? Is it a lifelong thing?
It would be cool if it was. No, for funding sources, so our treatment is paid for by commercial insurance and through Medicaid or Forward Health in the state of Wisconsin. And we get between 1 to 3 years to do intensive level treatment, which is anywhere between 25 to 40 hours of therapy per week. And then beyond that, something called focused level of treatment is 25 hours or less. As long as a child is continuing to make progress every 6 months, which we put in a treatment plan and submit, then they'll continue to approve that. But typically, kids are in treatment for between 1 to 4 years, whatever level that looks like for them.
And people's, if they're adults and they have insurance, I mean, something might be covered there too. So there may be some kind of treatment out there for people at any given age for any length of time.
And IRIS, which is the adult fund, it's care managed organization funds.
Oh, I've heard of it. I've heard of it.
IRIS can fund ABA treatment if somebody's able to find a provider.
Yeah, one of my other guests about a year and a half or so ago mentioned IRIS, and I forgot about it, but it just came back to me now. So if a family's interested in treatment, who should they contact first?
Our website is the best place to do that. So
Okay.
caravelautism.com. There is a contact us tab, and the online form is the best way for a parent to aggregate that information. So they put in their information, what they might need. If somebody already has a diagnosis, then they can call us and say, hey, I'm interested in treatment. So people may have gotten a diagnosis in another state and then they moved here or something along those lines. But we aim to, and if we can't provide treatment, we're going to refer them to another provider that would be able to do so.
Okay. Just a couple things that we've got a few minutes left here. And you know, we're taping this, as I mentioned at the outset, in July. But I think about Christmas in July. And then I think about Christmas, which the way this year is flying by, it's going to be here before we know it. But whether it's for Christmas gifts or birthdays or just, hey, I love this child and I want to get something for them. Do people have to purchase gifts differently with other things in mind when they're buying for a child with autism?
I think so. I think we want to purchase gifts that we know the child is going to like. And that may mean that a 10-year-old really likes Thomas and Friends train sets. Then that's what we purchase them. At our clinic, in the 6 weeks leading up to Christmas, we have our staff record things that the kids have been playing with at the clinic. We give the list to the parents, and then the parents disperse the list to their family members because they're aiming to make sure that their child is getting something that they're actually going to use. But some kids' favorite thing might be a puffball. Like, it doesn't have to be an exciting toy.
Yeah.
Or the box that the toy is in.
Yeah, right. The box that the toy is in may be more exciting
Dogs
than the
like
toy
the
itself.
boxes,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. But I do think, yes, you have to look at what does that child want and like. If your child really doesn't like sensory things, like I don't like sticky things, giving that child slime or Play-Doh for a gift, they're never going to touch that.
So it's not so much, it's more about what the child likes and prefers over, okay, they should have this because this makes more sense for their level of autism.
Sure.
Okay.
And some parents too will find things that they need or want for therapy and then put that on the Christmas list. Like, that's a really good way to do it too if it helps out the parent have an easier time.
Any other, and this is a loaded question for near the end of the show, but what other things do families need to know when they have a child with autism?
Oh, that is
Other
a
than
loaded
that,
question.
there's help out there.
There is help
and
out
they
there.
should avail themselves of it.
I think it's really important for parents to know that nothing they did led to an autism outcome. There's
Okay,
no
good.
research to indicate that at the moment. No matter how many times lawyers want to say, if you took Tylenol and now your child has autism, that's a class action lawsuit.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah.
actual evidence behind that. But be understanding. Meet your child where they're at and go from there.
And patient.
And be patient.
I was gonna say it's gonna take time, and for some it's a very quick turnaround, and for some it's gonna take a longer period of time. And obviously there's sometimes waiting games in terms of getting on wait lists to access therapy or funding sources. So.
Well, I would think too, it can be exhausting at times, and that's not the child's fault.
Nope.
It's just like when we are caregivers for, someone who's got Alzheimer's or whatever, any kind of dementia for that matter. That can be a very wearing thing, and it doesn't mean you don't love the person.
Right.
It just means, hey, I'm only human too, and I am just getting worn down. And there are, memory cafes and things like that, and places where people who are caregivers for people with autism, with dementia and so forth, where they can go to kind of help get a little bit of a respite. Are such things available for parents?
Yes.
Yes, similar to what we talked about before through that county long-term support waiver.
Yeah.
That is definitely something. It's case-by-case basis, of course. A couple different variables that the case manager and the county has to take into consideration, but that is one of the big perks and benefits to that program as well as that respite.
Wonderful.
It would be great if more people did respite. In town here, there is a place called Step 2 Step. And they provide some respite care. It's over on off of Bowen.
Okay.
By the train tracks.
Okay. Good to know.
But burnout is real for caregivers, and it's okay for them to need to take a break. Just like you said, it doesn't mean they don't love their child, but everybody needs a break once in a while.
Absolutely.
And especially with those level 3 really severe problem behaviors, it can be very taxing on everybody involved.
Okay.
The
Wonderful.
divorce rate is higher in families where there's kids on, so really thinking about how it impacts the whole family unit and not just the child themselves.
All right, great. Well, Abby Amacher and Courtney Schroeder, we thank you very much for being here. This has been a fascinating hour, and I thank you very much for being here. And, please reach out to them at caravelautism.com if you feel like you may have a situation where a child is suffering from autism. I think I have to wrap up. Do I have to wrap up, guys? Okay. All right, well then I'm going to wrap up. I wanted to just say that we need volunteers here at the show, and we've got something up on the screen right now. It doesn't take a lot. If you've got just a few hours a month, maybe anywhere from 3 to 4 hours a month, more like 3. Just, it's interesting work. We don't pay you. That's why it's a volunteer position, but, you meet a lot of interesting people. You learn a lot, just as we've all learned a lot here tonight. And, just reach out to me at the address or the phone number on the screen, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. So, all right, that's going to do it for us. Thanks again to my guests. Thanks to my crew. And as always, thanks to you. You are why we do this. So we will see you next time. Until then, please take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.